Hey, what's good? Plato was a foundational ancient Greek philosopher, student of Socrates, and teacher of Aristotle. In that one little sentence, I just dropped three names of three incredibly intelligent and thought inspiring people. In this video, we're going to learn why Plato thinks that crowds always choose lies over the truth. Before we get into it, remember to go to coconutjustice.com to get you some clothes that I think would look good on you. Let's go. Yeah, buddy. Between Socrates, Plato, even Aristotle. These boys be thinking. And it's funny because I say this all the time on the channel, but Socrates hated democracy because the general public is dumb. And so it'll be interesting to see what they say in this video about crowds, crowdthink. Hopefully they talk about crowdthink and, you know, how it doesn't matter these days who you talk to. You know which way some person is leaning just by the way they talk. So it'll be interesting to see groupthink and you know, people getting brainwashed, and especially, boy, this administration, they are pushing the boundaries of acceptable lies. Holy cow. Anyway, let's get into it. Those who are able to see beyond the shadows and lies of their culture will never be understood, let alone believed by the masses. Whoa, that's pretty deep. That's pretty deep. Because you can try to convince someone of something, and they've been convinced of something else. But yeah, it's important to pay attention to those able to see beyond the shadows. What happens in the shadows? The people that do bad stuff, do they do it out in the open, or do they do it in the shadows? Are they hiding, or are they out, you know, where everyone can see? Nowadays, nowadays they're straight up doing it in your face. They're straight up stealing and taking, and they're on the take, and they're taking like jets and all kinds of stuff. It's crazy. It's crazy. Let's go.
Why do millions of people simultaneously believe the same obvious lies? Why do intelligent individuals, when gathered in groups, consistently make decisions that seem utterly irrational? And why does this pattern repeat throughout history with such devastating precision that you can predict exactly when societies will choose comfortable deception over uncomfortable reality? Right now, as you're watching this, billions of people across the globe are actively choosing deception over truth. They're not stupid. They're not ignorant. They're not victims of manipulation.
I wonder how much of it is just you're comfortable with the devil you know.
Making calculated psychological decisions to embrace lies because truth threatens something more precious to them than reality itself.
Wow.
Their sense of belonging, their identity, their entire understanding of who they are. This isn't a modern phenomenon born of social media echo chambers or political polarization. This isn't about fake news or conspiracy theories or partisan propaganda. This is the fundamental architecture of human psychology, identified over 2,000 years ago by a philosopher who watched his entire civilization commit intellectual suicide in real time. Plato witnessed something that should terrify anyone who understands its implications.
Yeah.
He watched the execution of Socrates, the wisest man in Athens, voted to death by a democratic mob who preferred their comfortable illusions to his uncomfortable questions.
Yeah.
That moment revealed a truth about human nature so disturbing that most people still refuse to accept it today. If you want to understand why societies collapse, why democracies fail, why intelligent people believe absurd things, why rational civilizations make irrational choices, you need to understand what Plato discovered about crowds, truth, and the psychology of collective self-deception. Subscribe now, because what you're about to learn will fundamentally change how you see human behavior, social movements, political systems, and the hidden forces that determine whether civilizations survive or destroy themselves.
Why they
The year was
they're
300.
they're saying that in such a creepy way. All these things are gonna be scary. If you research, you'll be fine.
99 BCE. Athens, the birthplace of
This guy here looks a little like he's looking a little Charles Manson-y.
democracy, the crown jewel of ancient civilization, the most intellectually advanced society in human history, had just committed an act of collective insanity. They had sentenced Socrates to death, not for murder, not for treason, not for corruption, for asking questions that made people uncomfortable. Think about this for a moment. The most advanced civilization of its time chose to
Yeah. Dumb people get mad when you prove them wrong. Smart people, and again, you have to be very careful with how you approach conversations and stuff, right? If you go into a conversation trying to learn and being able to accept information, it the information being delivered is going to be accepted, and smart people can, like, kind of take that new information, install it in their brain, and even kick it around a little bit more just to prove the point a little bit more. Dumb people get mad. Dumb people, uneducated people, whatever. We'll just keep saying dumb people, whatever. Dumb people get upset when you prove them wrong because they thought that they're right, and their ego is so attached to being right. And nobody wants to be proven wrong, but turning into a butthole because you didn't have all of the information, or you just had new information, or there's a new way of looking at things, doesn't make you a bad person. You'd be like, oh, okay, cool. I bet you the next person you talk to, they had no idea. Well, unless you're making like YouTube videos, and then you got, there's some fellas out there that are paying the price now because there's a bunch of videos out there where they talked a bunch of mess and then they got proven wrong. We have to learn how to investigate, share information, and not be so hung up on. And this stuff happens in the professional world too. Doctors and historians and stuff like that. Just because they've learned something, or they came out with new bits of information or new understanding of some sort, their name is attached to it, and they don't want anyone to take that away. And so, information is stifled. But if we're going to progress as the human race, we need to start putting this ego stuff. There's a time and a place. But when it comes to actually learning and stuff like that, you have to get your ego out of there and make sure that you understand. Make sure that you're part of the human race. You're part of the team. All this stuff, all for me, none for thee, that stuff's got to be out the door. We're seeing it today. Playing that game doesn't work.
its wisest citizen because he insisted on examining their beliefs, challenging their assumptions, forcing them to think clearly about their most cherished convictions. The crowd that condemned him wasn't composed of ignorant peasants or bloodthirsty barbarians. These were educated citizens, accomplished philosophers, successful politicians, respected intellectuals, the cultural elite of their era. Yet when forced to choose between wisdom and comfort, right? Between truth and belonging,
he came and he was looking at things in a different way. He was coming and looking at things in a different way, and it challenged the understanding of the people, and they got upset.
Chose to kill the truth teller. Plato watched this happen. He saw his teacher, the most rational person he knew, destroyed by a supposedly rational society that couldn't tolerate rational inquiry. And in that moment, Plato understood something profound about crowds that we're only beginning to appreciate in our interconnected age. Crowds don't seek truth. They seek validation. They don't want reality. They want confirmation of what they already believe. They don't value wisdom. They value consensus. And they will systematically destroy anyone who threatens their collective delusions.
That's what you're seeing with the MAGA movement. I'm not saying that everything that they are hoping to change, I'm not saying all of their points of view are wrong. But, well, MAGA's the easy one to point out. But, yeah, some of the liberal folks, too, these groups, whatever they might be, Um, Everybody just wants to feel a part of something.
No matter how intelligent, how moral, or how beneficial those challenges might be. This insight became the foundation of everything Plato wrote about politics, education, human nature, and the conditions necessary for a just society. He realized that democracy, as Athens practiced it, contained a fatal flaw. It assumed that truth could be determined by majority opinion, that wisdom was somehow democratically distributed, that crowds were capable of making rational decisions about complex realities. But here's what makes Plato's analysis even more devastating. He discovered that crowds don't just accidentally prefer lies to truth. They systematically, predictably, inevitably choose lies because lies serve psychological functions that truth cannot provide.
That's
Truth
wild.
is isolating. It separates you from the group. It makes you individually responsible for your beliefs
But why wouldn't the group then just attach itself to the truth?
and actions. It forces you to confront uncomfortable realities about yourself, your society, your limitations, your mortality. Truth demands intellectual courage, emotional maturity, and moral independence that most people haven't developed and don't want to develop. Lies are communal. They bind groups together through shared belief. They provide instant identity, immediate purpose,
The
automatic
easy way
belonging.
out.
They protect people from having to face difficult questions about their lives,
Well,
their choices, their failures, their fears. Lies offer the illusion of certainty in an uncertain world,
look at how they make it
the
look
comfort
like
of simple answers to complex problems.
I don't know.
When a
That looks
crowd
like
is
a
forced to choose
religious
between truth and
gathering.
belonging, between reality and identity, between facts and community, between wisdom and validation, they choose belonging every single time. Not because they can't recognize truth, but because they value other things more than truth. This is why conspiracy theories spread faster than scientific facts. This is why political movements succeed through emotional manipulation rather than rational argument. This is why social media algorithms amplify outrage and confirmation bias rather than nuanced thinking. This is why even highly educated people believe obviously false things when those beliefs serve their tribal identity. Plato saw this pattern playing out in ancient Athens, and he understood that it would continue playing out throughout history wherever crowds were given power to determine truth, wherever popularity was confused with validity, wherever consensus was mistaken for wisdom. Consider how this dynamic manifests in contemporary society. Look at how information spreads through social networks.
Yeah.
People don't share content because it's accurate, well-researched, or intellectually rigorous.
It's a shortcut. Yeah, I'm guilty of doing that too. I see a post, I get all motivated and stuff, and then inevitably someone who cares about me is like, "Hey, that's wrong," and then I'm like, "Oh yeah, my bad," and then I will follow up with research if it's an important thing. I will follow up with research, but for the most part, yeah, they're talking about memes. They're talking about social media posts, stuff like that. And a lot of them are funny. But for the most part, it's just a shortcut. You don't have to do research if someone else has made a meme about it.
Share content because it confirms their existing beliefs, strengthens their tribal identity, makes them feel righteous, superior, validated in their worldview. The most viral content isn't the most truthful. It's the most emotionally satisfying. It's the content that provides simple explanations for complex problems, that blames convenient scapegoats for systemic issues, that promises easy solutions to difficult challenges, that tells people exactly what they want to hear about themselves and their enemies. This creates what Plato would recognize as a fundamental systemic problem. In any society where truth is determined by popularity, lies will always win because lies are inherently more popular than truth. Truth is often inconvenient, complex, nuanced, ambiguous, uncomfortable. It requires intellectual effort to understand, emotional courage to accept, and moral strength to act upon. Truth forces people to question their assumptions, revise their beliefs, admit their mistakes, confront their limitations. Lies can be...
And pay attention, because, and I keep going back to the current administration. He lied. What's the tagline is lie, deny, and then Whatever it is, whatever it is. One of the guys Trump used as like a hero or a guide or mentor, whatever, taught Trump never admit that you're wrong, always be right, blah blah blah, blah. And he's taken it to a completely different level. Even when he's completely wrong, even when he's completely wrong, he still goes on like a bull in the china shop. Um, and he's just totally driven by ego. That's why he puts his name on everything. That's why. That's why. Good, bad, indifferent. He's never sent me an invitation to anything, so I couldn't care less about him. Anyway, all that to say, my man has been taught from a young age to do all this silliness that he's doing, that he's right and all this stuff. I don't understand how people co-sign or even want to hang out with someone like that. You can't rest around people like that. You just can't. They're always on the take. They're always looking to put their hands in your pockets. And there's a lot of stories about that lifestyle that is just not attractive to me at all. Anyway,
Emotionally satisfying, perfectly tailored to existing prejudices and fears. They require no intellectual effort, demand no moral courage, threaten no existing beliefs. They offer instant gratification, immediate certainty, effortless superiority over those who disagree. When Plato developed his famous allegory of the cave, he was describing exactly this psychological phenomenon. The prisoners chained in the cave prefer the familiar shadows on the wall to the harsh reality of sunlight. The shadows are comfortable, predictable, non-threatening.
think about that. Think about when you talk to people that have been in jail and prison. Very much that. Very much, they get used to the regimentation. They get used to getting up at a certain time, having a certain amount of sunlight, having a certain amount of boom, and you get used to terrible food and all that stuff. It just seems like there's a lot of similarities between what he's trying to say. People, good or bad, people get used to their surroundings.
They don't challenge the prisoner's understanding of reality or demand any difficult adjustments in thinking or behavior. But here's the crucial insight that most people miss about Plato's allegory. The prisoners don't just passively reject the truth when it's offered to them. They actively attack anyone who tries to enlighten them. They become violent in defense of their illusions. They treat truth-telling as an act of aggression against their
That's where
community.
MAGA kicks
This
in.
is exactly what happened to Socrates. This is what happens to whistleblowers who expose institutional corruption. This is what happens to investigative journalists who challenge popular narratives.
Yeah, for
This
real.
is what happens to scientists who present evidence that contradicts widely held beliefs. This is what happens to anyone who threatens the collective delusions that hold social groups together. Crowds don't just choose lies over truth. They punish truth-tellers and reward skilled liars. They create social systems that systematically
You ain't never
incentivize
lied.
deception and penalize honesty. They develop elaborate mechanisms for silencing dissent and enforcing conformity to group beliefs. Understanding this dynamic explains so much about human history that seems otherwise inexplicable. It explains why rational societies make consistently irrational decisions. It explains why intelligent people believe absurd things when they're part of groups. It explains why civilizations collapse even when their problems are obvious and their solutions are readily available. It explains why scientific progress encounters such fierce resistance, why social reforms face violent opposition, why moral advances meet organized backlash, why every attempt to expand human understanding or improve social conditions must overcome the determined resistance of crowds defending their familiar lies against uncomfortable truths. The
And that
crowds
goes both ways. That goes both ways. You remember when Barack Obama was president and everybody thought that he was the Antichrist and blah, 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 blah. Same thing with Trump. Trump is here. He's trying to force people to do things his way, and everyone is fighting. And good or bad, I don't know. But depending on the topic, Trump can't do anything without half the country shitting all over that policy. Good or bad. There's some things in there that might be good. I know that people are trying to convince you that he's also the Antichrist, but we need to we just need smarter crowds. At the end of the day, we just need smarter crowds.
That Plato identified operates at every level of social organization. In families, where uncomfortable truths about dysfunction, addiction, or abuse are systematically avoided in favor of maintaining artificial harmony. In organizations, where honest feedback about performance or problems is discouraged in favor of positive thinking and team cohesion. In communities, where acknowledging difficult realities about inequality, injustice, or institutional failure threatens group solidarity. In nations, where complex problems are reduced to simple narratives that blame convenient outsiders and promise magical solutions. Where historical crimes are denied or justified rather than honestly confronted. Where present failures are attributed to external enemies rather than internal contradictions. At every level, the pattern is the same. Groups prefer comforting lies to uncomfortable truths, and they will punish anyone who insists on replacing those lies with reality.
Think about Jesus. That's a really good point. Think about Jesus. Jesus didn't do anything but contradict everything that was happening. When they put an end to that.
Plato didn't just diagnose this problem. He proposed a solution, though it's a solution that most people find even more uncomfortable than the problem itself. Plato argued that societies should be governed not by crowds, not by popular opinion, not by democratic consensus, but by philosopher kings. Individuals who have undergone rigorous intellectual and moral training, who have learned to prefer truth over popularity, reality over comfort, wisdom.
So basically, what? A group of popes? You know? That's what that sounds like. It sounds like, well, you know, like well, I guess any clergy is you have the leaders that have gone to training and they've gotten well versed and well researched and but they've done the research in that certain thing, that certain religion, and then they have their, you know, their little helpers and whatever the hell they're called. But it sounds like that. It sounds like they're trying to be like a little more Republican. The Republicans are this. So think of this. Democrats want you to vote no matter what. Republicans only want people that have been trained, right? So that's why they're pulling some of the things that they're doing. So they're trying to pull these tricks because they don't want everyone to vote. So it depends on how you want to see it. Do you want everyone in charge of their own well-being and their own future? Or are you going to give the power to a small group of people that have the money to be educated and all that stuff? That's the difference. That's the difference between one of the differences, but one of the basic differences is Democrats want everyone to vote, and the Republicans only want a certain amount of people that they deem educated and blah, 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 blah. So that brings a little clarity to Plato's stance.
Over validation. This sounds profoundly elitist to modern ears, and in many ways it is. But Plato's point wasn't that some people are inherently superior to others. His point was that seeking truth, thinking clearly, and making wise decisions require specific skills, disciplines, and character traits that most people haven't developed because they haven't been properly educated and because they lack sufficient motivation. Just as we don't allow untrained people to perform surgery or design bridges or pilot aircraft, Plato argued, we shouldn't allow intellectually and morally untrained people to make decisions about truth, justice, and the organization of society. This
Yeah. I think if you live here, you should have a say in what you want your country to look like. To be able to run the country, though, I think that's where all of this training and all this stuff should happen. I think everyone should be educated. But if you want to pull the levers of Congress, pull the levers of government, you need to be trained. You need to understand how government works. You need to understand, what's happening.
idea horrifies contemporary sensibilities because we've been taught that everyone's opinion is equally valid, that democracy means giving everyone an equal voice regardless of their knowledge or wisdom, that expertise is a form of oppression rather than a necessary qualification for complex decisions. But Plato would argue that these beliefs themselves demonstrate exactly the kind of crowd thinking that leads societies to systematically choose lies over truth. We prefer the comforting democratic lie that all opinions are equal to the uncomfortable aristocratic truth that some people know more than others, that some ideas are better than others, that wisdom is...
Right. He's about to talk about wisdom. There's a lot of very wise people that I know that didn't go to school nearly as much as some dumbass people that I know.
rare and difficult to achieve. The consequences of this crowd-driven approach to truth are visible everywhere in contemporary society. We see them in the systematic rejection of scientific consensus on climate change, vaccine safety, and evolutionary biology. We see them in political movements that promise simple solutions to complex problems while demonizing experts who point out the complexity. We see them in social media platforms that amplify popular misinformation while suppressing accurate but unpopular information. We see them in educational systems that prioritize self-esteem over intellectual rigor, that avoid challenging students' existing beliefs, that treat all perspectives as equally valid regardless of evidence.
Yeah.
We see them in news media that tailors coverage to audience preferences rather than factual accuracy, that sensationalizes...
The fairness doctrine, I believe it's called the fairness, whatever. But I know it's fairness. I want to say the doctrine, but basically back when news and TV were still young, you were forced to present both sides of a certain argument. And then I want to say in the 80s, they did away with that. And after that's when you started to see the division. You had Fox News pulling one way, you had MSNBC pulling the other way, and they're only allowed is the wrong word, but they will only show you the one side of the argument, and they give you all of their opinions, and they tear down everything else that might be contrary to their point of view. And so does, MSNBC and even CNN from what I can see. I get my news I collect information from all of those, but I get my news off of YouTube and stuff like that. And I research. I'll see something and I research it, try to figure it out for myself. Yeah. Ever since changing the fairness doctrine, it's just torn this country to pieces. And I've been talking to people on this channel that kind of want to bring that stuff back. It's nonsense to do things the way that we're doing. We gotta get back to. I mean, if we're gonna make America great again, we can pull aspects of it, like the fairness doctrine. Do away with Citizens United, like give the power back to the people. That's how we're going to make America great, giving the power to the people.
trivial controversies while ignoring important but complex issues, that treats politics as entertainment rather than serious governance. Most troubling, we see them in the emergence of what philosophers call post-truth culture, a society where the very concept of objective truth is rejected in favor of subjective experience and tribal loyalty.
Folks have been tying themselves in knots to come up with different ways to not say lie. You are lying. There's the truth and there's the lie. Alternative facts. Whatever it was that this dude said, it's either a lie or the truth. It's either the truth or not that.
Facts become matters of political opinion,
Alternate facts,
where
or
reality
whatever it was
itself
that he
becomes
said.
optional. This represents the complete triumph of crowd psychology over rational thinking. When truth itself becomes a matter of democratic consensus, when facts become partisan talking points, when reality becomes a social construction, we've reached the logical endpoint of the dynamic that Plato identified 24 centuries ago. Yet Plato also understood that this dynamic isn't inevitable or insurmountable. Individuals can escape the cave. They can learn to prefer truth over comfort, reality over illusion, wisdom over validation. But it requires enormous effort, sustained discipline, considerable courage, and often painful sacrifice of social belonging and popular approval. The process Plato described as philosophical education involves systematically questioning everything you believe, examining the logical foundations of your assumptions, developing the intellectual tools necessary for clear thinking, and cultivating the moral courage to accept uncomfortable truths about yourself and your society. This isn't just an academic exercise or intellectual hobby. It's a profound transformation of character that enables individuals to resist crowd psychology and make decisions based on reality rather than social pressure, on evidence rather than emotion, on reason rather than tribal loyalty. But here's the tragic paradox.
Stop taking people's word for it.
The people most capable
So
of
many
this
people are
philosophical
lying to you, and you guys are like,
transformation
yeah,
often the
okay,
least
I'm going to
motivated
inject
pursue it,
bleach.
because they benefit from existing systems
I'll
and
put
have
this
little
light
incentive
inside
to
me.
challenge prevailing orthodoxies. And the people most motivated to seek truth are often the least equipped to handle the psychological demands of genuine philosophical inquiry. This creates what Plato saw as a nearly impossible situation. Societies desperately need philosopher kings to survive and flourish, but they systematically prevent the development of philosopher kings and punish anyone who attempts to become one. The solution, according to Plato, requires a complete restructuring of education and social organization. Instead of teaching people what to think, we need to teach them how to think. Instead of rewarding conformity and popularity, we need to reward curiosity and intellectual courage. Instead of making truth subordinate to consensus, we need to make consensus subordinate to truth. But implementing such radical changes requires exactly the kind of philosophical leadership that crowds consistently reject. It's a bootstrap problem. We need wise leaders to create a society that systematically produces wise leaders, but we can't get wise leaders without a society that values wisdom over popularity. This doesn't mean the situation is entirely hopeless. Throughout history, exceptional individuals have successfully resisted crowd psychology and maintained their commitment to truth, even when it required enormous personal sacrifice. Scientists have maintained intellectual integrity despite social pressure and professional consequences. Artists have continued creating authentic work despite market demands and critical opposition.
Artists
Moral
saving the
leaders
world
have
again.
stood for justice despite popular hostility and violent persecution. These individuals demonstrate that it's possible to escape Plato's cave, to choose truth over lies, reality over illusion, wisdom over validation. But they also demonstrate how rare and difficult such choices are, how much courage and discipline they require, and how much most people are willing to sacrifice to avoid making them. The question each of us faces is whether we're willing to pay the price of philosophical truth. The loss of comfortable illusions, the sacrifice of easy social belonging, the burden of thinking for ourselves rather than letting crowds think for us, the responsibility of forming our own judgments rather than accepting popular opinions. Most people aren't willing to pay this price. They prefer the security of shared delusions to the uncertainty of independent thought. They choose tribal identity over individual integrity, social validation over personal truth, the comfort of belonging to the difficulty of thinking. And this, ultimately, is why crowds always choose lies over truth. not because they lack the intellectual capacity to recognize truth, but because truth threatens everything they value more than truth itself. Belonging, identity, security, comfort, the illusion of certainty in an uncertain world. Plato's brutal warning wasn't just about ancient Athens or historical democracies. It was about human nature itself, about the eternal tension between our capacity for wisdom and our need for belonging, between our ability to think clearly and our desire for social validation, between our potential for truth and our preference for comfortable illusion. Understanding this dynamic doesn't make it easier to resist. If anything, it makes resistance more difficult because it reveals how deep the problem goes, how fundamental it is to human psychology, how embedded it is in the basic structure of social organization. But understanding also creates genuine possibility. When you recognize crowd psychology operating in yourself and others, you can begin to make conscious choices about when to conform and when to resist, when to seek validation and when to seek truth, when to prioritize belonging and when to prioritize integrity. You can develop what Plato would call philosophical immunity, the intellectual and moral capacity to maintain independent judgment even when surrounded by people who have surrendered their ability to think for themselves. This immunity doesn't make you superior to others or exempt from human limitations. It makes you responsible to others, obligated to use your capacity for clear thinking in service of truth rather than personal advantage, committed to helping others develop their own philosophical capabilities rather than exploiting their intellectual dependence. It means becoming the kind of person who asks uncomfortable questions even when comfortable answers are available, who challenges popular assumptions even when those challenges are unwelcome, who refuses to participate in collective self-deception even when participation would be easier, safer, and more profitable. That's Plato's enduring challenge to anyone willing to take truth seriously. Will you choose the comfort of the cave or the responsibility of philosophical sight? Will you follow crowds into collective delusion or maintain your individual commitment to reality? Will you prioritize belonging over integrity, validation over wisdom, comfort over truth? The answer to these questions determines not just your personal authenticity and intellectual development, but the fate of the societies you help create and the world you leave behind. Because in the end, societies that systematically choose lies over truth don't just fail to flourish, they fail to survive. And that's a truth that no amount of crowd psychology can change. If this philosophical analysis challenged your assumptions about truth, democracy, and human nature, I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below.
All right, there you go. That's why you have to be careful. The company you keep. You have to be careful with the company you keep. Because, yeah, it feels good to be a part of a group. It feels good to be a part of a family. But like those people that were wearing the Nikes and they drank the Kool-Aid and, you know, those guys. It doesn't, we have to fix education. You have to be able to have enough confidence in yourself and the knowledge that you carry with you to be able to say, no, group. For example, January 6th, you have to have enough confidence in yourself to say, they're breaking into that building. They're beating up cops. Maybe I should pull back. Maybe that's just me. You know, same way you go out, you go and hang out with some friends and they're doing things and they're that you don't click with. You have to have enough self-confidence, confidence in yourself to be able to be like, nah, I'm good with that. No, that's not quite right. Education is the key. Education is the key. We have to change the way that we look at education, and we have to change the way that we look at being intelligent. And then we have to leverage all of that to making things better for everyone, not just one small group. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Share it with each and every one of your friends. And if you want to come hang out with me, watch videos while I work on creative projects, hit that subscribe button. Then change the little bell icon so it says all. That way, every time I come out with something new, you'll be alerted. Don't forget to go to coconutjustice.com to get you some dope gear. And with that, I'm out.